The Vorthak hegemony had spent months gathering their war fleet at the very edge of human territory. 1,000 massive warships hung in perfect formation against the backdrop of distant stars, their hulls gleaming with deadly intent. Each vessel bristled with enough firepower to level entire cities, and together they represented the most fearsome military force the galaxy had ever seen. Fleet Commander Thaxmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the holographic display. That showed his armada in all its terrible glory. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. After decades of conquest across dozens of star systems, he had learned to savor these moments before battle. The anticipation of victory was almost as sweet as the victory itself. His intelligence officers had briefed him thoroughly on humanity, a young species that had barely crawled out of their home system, possessing primitive technology and laughably small numbers. They had established a few mining colonies and trading posts, nothing more. Most galactic powers considered them an irrelevant footnote in the grand sweep of interstellar politics, yet somehow these humans had dared to refuse the hegemony's demands for tribute. They had actually sent diplomatic messages claiming they wanted to negotiate as equals. The audacity was both amusing and insulting. Now, according to his scanners, a single human ship was approaching his position. Just one vessel, moving at a leisurely pace as if its crew had no idea what awaited them. Thaxmore almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Meanwhile, aboard the human ship Horizon, Captain Kim Day sat in his command chair with the stillness of a man who had made peace with his fate long ago. The bridge around him hummed with quiet activity as his crew went about their duties with practiced efficiency. Through the main view screen, he could see the Vorthak fleet spread across the darkness like a constellation of death. Lieutenant Park, Min, his communications officer, turned from her station with a grim expression. She was young for her rank, but Kim had learned to trust her judgment completely during their years serving together. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission. From the enemy flagship. It's the same message as before." Kim nodded without surprise. The Vorthak had been broadcasting their ultimatum on repeat for the past hour, each repetition more insulting than the last. They spoke to humanity as if addressing disobedient children, demanding immediate surrender and promising swift destruction to any who resisted. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had been listening to such threats for their entire history. They had faced down predators, natural disasters, and countless wars among themselves. Being threatened by reptilian aliens from across the galaxy was hardly their first rodeo, with seemingly impossible odds. The horizon itself looked like nothing special from the outside. Standard hull configuration, basic weapon emplacements, regulation shield generators. Any alien scanner would classify it as a routine patrol vessel, the kind used for showing the flag in remote systems and responding to minor emergencies. There was absolutely nothing about its appearance that would suggest it represented anything more than a token gesture of defiance. But Captain Kim knew better. Beneath that unremarkable exterior lay secrets that had taken humanity's greatest minds decades to perfect. Lieutenant Park Min's fingers moved across her communication console with the steady precision of someone who had trained for this moment, her entire career. The incoming signal was strong and clear, broadcast on multiple frequencies to ensure every human within range would hear what came next. She took a deep breath before turning to face her captain. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from the Vorthak flagship," she announced, her voice carrying just the right amount of professional calm. Despite the 1,000 enemy warships arrayed against them, despite knowing that death seemed almost certain, she refused to let fear creep into her tone. Her family back on Earth had raised her to face challenges head-on, and she wouldn't dishonor their memory by showing weakness now. The main view screen flickered to life, and suddenly the bridge was filled with the imposing presence of the enemy. "Commander." Fleet Commander Thaxmore was everything the intelligence reports had described and worse. His reptilian features spoke of a species that had evolved from apex predators, with razor-sharp teeth that gleamed when he spoke, and eyes that held no trace of mercy or compassion. Scars crisscrossed his scaled hide, telling the story of countless battles across the galaxy. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Primitive humans," he began, each word dripping, with contempt that seemed to poison the very air around him. You sail alone into death like fools rushing toward their own graves. Look around you and count my ships if your simple minds are capable of such mathematics. The alien commander gestured dramatically, and the screen briefly showed the view from his flagship. Row upon row of Vorthak warships stretched into the distance, their weapon systems already charging with deadly energy. Each vessel was easily 3 times the size of the horizon, bristling with enough firepower to crack planets. The message was clear and terrifying. "Surrender your pathetic colonies now," Thaxmore continued, his voice rising to a roar that echoed through the bridge. "Speakers, bow before the might of the Vorthak hegemony, and perhaps we will allow some of your species to live as slaves. Refuse and watch as your pathetic excuse for a warship burns in the void while your worlds follow shortly after." Captain Kim Day rose from his command chair with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had faced death before and found it wanting. Behind him, Engineer Cho Han worked quietly at his station, his fingers dancing across controls that would seem meaningless. To alien eyes, the soft beeping of his console was barely audible above the alien commander's threats, but Kim could hear each input being accepted by the ship's most classified systems. "Commander Thaxmore," Kim replied, his voice carrying none of the fear or desperation the alien clearly expected to hear. "Humanity has always preferred diplomatic solutions to our problems. We believe that intelligent species can find common ground through honest negotiation and mutual respect." The Vorthak commander's laugh was a harsh, grating sound that seemed to scrape against the walls of the bridge like claws on metal. It spoke of cruel amusement at human naivety. Fleet Commander Thaxmore decided it was time to educate these foolish humans about the reality of galactic warfare. He opened a channel that would broadcast across every frequency, ensuring that not only the crew of the Horizon would hear his words, but any human listening posts in nearby systems would receive his message as well. This would serve as both a demonstration of power and a warning to any other species foolish enough to consider defying the Vorthak hegemony. "Behold the instruments of your destruction," Thaxmore announced, his voice filled with the pride of a predator displaying his claws. "Each of my warships carries plasma artillery capable of melting through any known armor in seconds. Our quantum missiles can punch holes through space itself, creating explosions that turn matter into pure energy." As he spoke, tactical displays throughout the Vorthak fleet lit up like deadly Christmas trees. Weapon systems that had conquered dozens of star systems began their charging sequences, filling space with an ominous red glow. The commander gestured toward his fleet with obvious satisfaction, like an artist admiring his masterpiece. 1,000 ships. Human, he continued, savoring each word. 1,000 instruments of annihilation, each one capable of reducing your pathetic colonies to glowing craters. We have glassed entire worlds that dared oppose us. We have turned proud civilizations into ash and memory. Your species numbers in the billions. But what are billions against the infinite patience of extinction? The alien commander's eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation. Throughout his long career, he had delivered this same speech to countless species. Some begged, some raged, some tried to bargain. All ultimately submitted or died. It was the natural order of things, and humans would be no different. "You have exactly 60 seconds to turn your ship around and retreat," Thaxmore declared, his voice taking on the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. 60 seconds to save what remains of your miserable existence. After that time expires, we will demonstrate exactly why every civilized species in this galaxy fears the might of the Vorthak hegemony. Aboard the Horizon, the atmosphere was completely different from what the alien commander expected. There was no panic, no desperate scrambling to escape, no frantic attempts at negotiation. Instead, Tactical Officer Lee Jun sat calmly at his station, his fingers moving steadily across his console as he tracked every single enemy weapon system. His screens showed detailed readouts of plasma charges, missile locks, and firing solutions. To any observer, it might have seemed like he was simply documenting their impending doom, but Lee Jun had trained for this moment his entire adult life. He knew exactly what he was looking for, and more importantly, He knew what the Vorthak fleet couldn't detect about the horizon. The irony wasn't lost on him that the aliens were so focused on displaying their overwhelming firepower that they had completely failed to properly scan their target. Captain Kim turned slightly in his chair, making eye contact with each member of his bridge crew. No words were necessary. They had practiced this scenario in countless simulations, prepared for this exact situation through decades of secret training that the galaxy knew nothing about. Lieutenant Park Min's hands hovered over her communication controls. Engineer, Chohan's preparations were nearly complete. The countdown began echoing across all frequencies. 59, 58, 57. The truth about the horizon was a secret that only a handful of people in the entire human race were allowed to know. What the Vorthak fleet saw as a simple patrol vessel was actually the result of humanity's most ambitious and dangerous scientific project. Hidden beneath layers of ordinary-looking hull plating and standard equipment lay technology that pushed the very boundaries of what was thought possible in the universe. Engineer Chohan sat at his station like a master pianist preparing for the performance of his lifetime. The controls before him looked deceptively simple, but each button and switch represented years of theoretical research and practical testing that had pushed human science into completely uncharted territory. His fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours practicing these exact sequences, knowing that a single mistake could mean not just his death, but the end of human civilization itself. 20 years ago, Earth's greatest scientific minds had gathered in secret facilities buried deep underground, far from prying eyes and alien surveillance. Physicists, engineers, and theorists had worked around the clock on humanity's most classified project. They called it the Quantum Field Manipulation Array, though most simply referred to it as the miracle, because that's what it would take for it to actually work. The concept was simple enough to understand, even if the execution was impossibly complex. By creating controlled tiers in the fabric of space-time itself, the array could theoretically manipulate fundamental forces in ways that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Energy could be redirected, momentum could be reversed, and matter itself could be convinced to behave in ways that should have been impossible. Science Officer Yang Su watched her instruments with the focused intensity of someone monitoring a sleeping dragon. The energy readings on her screens would have sent alien scientists into fits of disbelief, showing power levels that their sensors would dismiss as equipment malfunctions. Quantum fluctuations danced across her displays like aurora lights, beautiful and terrifying in their implications. The ship's camouflage systems were almost as impressive as the weapon itself. Sophisticated holographic projectors and sensor scramblers made the horizon appear completely unremarkable to any external scan. Its energy signature matched that of a standard patrol craft. Its weapon system seemed basic and outdated, and its hull composition appeared to be nothing more than conventional materials. Even if the Vorthak had performed detailed scans, they would have found nothing to suggest this ship was anything special. Captain Kim Day had volunteered for this mission, fully understanding what it meant. If the quantum field array failed, if the camouflage systems were discovered, if any part of humanity's desperate gamble went wrong, then Earth itself would pay the price. The Vorthak would not stop with destroying one ship. They would hunt down every human colony, every outpost, every trace of human civilization in the galaxy. But Kim also understood what success would mean. If the array worked as designed, if 20 years of secret research and development proved worthwhile, then humanity would take its place among the galaxy's major powers in the most dramatic way possible. The countdown continued its relentless march toward zero. 21 November 2019, Yang Su looked up from her station. Captain, all quantum matrices are aligned and ready. Chohan's voice was steady and professional. Field generators at full power, sir. We are go for activation. The truth behind the horizon's unremarkable appearance was a story that began in the deepest research facilities on Earth, hidden so far underground that sunlight had never touched their walls. For 20 long years, humanity's greatest scientific minds had worked in complete secrecy on a project that most governments didn't even know existed. They called it Project Looking Glass, and it represented humanity's most desperate attempt to survive in a galaxy full of hostile alien empires. The quantum field manipulators that now hummed quietly beneath the ship's hull were the result of countless failed experiments, theoretical breakthroughs that had driven scientists to the edge of madness, and engineering challenges that had seemed impossible to solve. These devices could do something that no other species in the galaxy had ever achieved. They could actually convince the universe to bend its own rules. Engineer Cho Han had been handpicked for this mission after spending 3 years learning to operate technology that officially didn't exist. The control panel before him looked simple enough, with standard buttons and displays that wouldn't draw attention from casual observers. But every component had been designed to channel forces that could tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. His training had taken place in simulation chambers, where a single mistake could theoretically create a black hole. The technology worked by creating controlled disruptions in quantum fields that surrounded all matter in the universe. By carefully manipulating these invisible forces, the array could redirect energy, reverse momentum, and even convince photons to travel in directions that physics said were impossible. It was like having a conversation with the fundamental laws of nature and somehow managing to change their minds. Science Officer Yang Su watched her instruments with the focused intensity of someone monitoring a sleeping volcano. The energy readings on her screens showed patterns that would have caused alien computers to shut down in confusion, displaying power levels that conventional science said couldn't exist in such a small space. Quantum fluctuations danced across, her displays like lightning frozen in time, beautiful and terrifying in their implications for what was about to happen. The ship's camouflage systems were almost as impressive as the weapon they concealed. Advanced holographic projectors created false sensor readings that made external scans show exactly what observers expected to see: a standard patrol craft with basic weapons, conventional engines, and unremarkable power output. Even detailed analysis would reveal nothing suspicious, nothing to suggest this vessel was anything more than what it appeared to be. Captain Kim Day had volunteered for this assignment, knowing exactly what it meant for both himself and his species. Every computer simulation suggested the quantum field array would work perfectly under combat conditions, but simulations were just educated guesses about reality. If the system failed when they needed it most, humanity's first contact with the Vorthak hegemony would also be their last. The countdown continued its relentless approach towards zero. 22, 21, 20. Time expires, human. Fool! Fleet Commander Thaxmore's voice thundered across every communication channel, filled with the savage joy of a predator about to strike. 1,000 Vorthak warships fired as one. Space erupted into brilliant destruction as plasma beams, capable of melting asteroid cores, lanced through the darkness. Quantum torpedoes streaked toward the horizon like falling stars, each carrying enough explosive force to shatter small moons into debris. Captain Kim watched the approaching wall of annihilation with steady eyes. Officer Yang, are the calculations complete? Yes, sir. All quantum matrices perfectly aligned. Kim spoke one word: execute. Reality held its breath. The final seconds of the countdown echoed across space like the tolling of a funeral bell. Throughout the Vorthak fleet, weapon systems that had conquered entire star systems reached full charge. Gun crews who had reduced proud civilizations to ash and memory prepared to add another victory to their collection. This would be quick work. Just one small human ship against the combined might of 1,000 warships. Time expires, human fool. Fleet Commander Thaxmore's voice exploded across every communication frequency, carrying the savage satisfaction of a predator finally ready to strike. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species, anticipating the moment when human arrogance would meet Vorthak reality. The order went out instantly across the entire fleet. Fire control officers who had been waiting for this moment pressed their triggers with the practiced ease of veterans. Plasma artillery, systems that could melt through planetary crust, discharged their deadly cargo. Quantum torpedo tubes launched their planet-cracking warheads. Energy weapons capable of boiling oceans focused their beams on a single target. 1,000 Vorthak warships unleashed their fury simultaneously in the most devastating display of firepower the galaxy had seen in centuries. The darkness of space transformed into a brilliant light show as countless energy beams lanced through the void like spears of pure destruction. Each plasma bolt carried enough heat to vaporize entire city blocks. Every quantum torpedo contained enough explosive force to crack moons in half. The combined attack was so intense that it created its own artificial aurora, painting the surrounding space in colors that had no names. Sensors throughout both fleets registered energy readings that pushed their instruments to maximum capacity. This wasn't just an attack. It was the complete annihilation of everything in a sphere of space several kilometers wide. Captain Kim Day stood on the bridge of the horizon, watching the approaching wall of destruction with eyes that showed no trace of fear or panic. Around him, his crew remained at their stations with the calm professionalism of people who had trained their entire careers for this exact moment. The brilliant light of incoming death reflected off the view screen, casting strange shadows across the bridge. 20 years of secret research and development had led to this single moment in time. Decades of theoretical breakthroughs, impossible engineering challenges, and dangerous experiments conducted in facilities so classified that most world leaders didn't know they existed. Everything humanity had learned about quantum physics, everything they had discovered about the fundamental forces that held the universe together, had been focused on creating this one opportunity. "Officer Yang, are the calculations complete?" Captain Kim asked, his voice carrying the steady calm of someone who had made peace with whatever came next. Science Officer Yang Su glanced at her instruments one final time, seeing readings that would have seemed like science fiction just 50 years earlier. Quantum matrices showed perfect alignment, energy flows registered at optimal levels, and every system indicator glowed green with readiness. "Yes, sir. All quantum matrices perfectly aligned and ready for activation," she reported with professional precision. Captain Kim took a deep breath and spoke the single word that would either save humanity or witness its destruction. The word that represented 20 years of humanity's greatest scientific achievement, the word that would change galactic history forever. Execute. Time seemed to stop. The universe itself appeared to hold its breath, waiting to see whether human ingenuity could triumph over overwhelming odds. Reality prepared to discover just how far the laws of physics could be bent. The moment Captain Kim spoke that single word, reality itself began to change around the horizon in ways that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about the universe. Deep within the ship's hull, quantum field generators that had taken humanity's greatest minds 20 years to perfect suddenly roared to life with power that shouldn't have been possible to contain in such a small space. The effect was immediate, and absolutely impossible according to every known law of physics. Space-time, the fundamental fabric that held the entire universe together, began to bend and twist around the human vessel like clay in the hands of a master sculptor. The invisible forces that governed everything from gravity to light itself suddenly became as malleable as warm metal, responding to human will in ways that no alien species had ever dreamed possible. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The massive barrage of destruction racing toward the horizon. Thousands of plasma beams hot enough to melt planets, quantum torpedoes carrying the explosive force of dying stars, energy weapons that could boil entire oceans, simply stopped moving forward. Not slowed down, not deflected, not absorbed. They just stopped, as if someone had pressed a cosmic pause button on the laws of physics themselves. Thousands of deadly energy blasts hung frozen in space like suspended lightning bolts, their brilliant light creating an impossible sculpture of pure destruction. Quantum torpedoes that should have been traveling at significant fractions of light speed now floated motionless like deadly Christmas ornaments, their warheads still armed but unable to reach their target. Plasma beams that had been lancing through space with the heat of miniature suns were now perfectly still columns of superheated matter, defying every principle of thermodynamics. The sight was so impossible, so completely contrary to everything that science said should happen. that it took several seconds for the reality of what they were seeing to sink in throughout both fleets. Weapons that had conquered star systems, energy that could crack moons, firepower that had reduced entire civilizations to ash, all of it hanging helplessly in space like insects trapped in amber. Fleet Commander Thaxmore stood frozen on his command bridge, his reptilian features twisted into an expression of complete disbelief. His tactical displays were showing readings that his computers kept flagging as system malfunctions because they were so far outside the realm of possibility. Energy signatures that violated fundamental laws, spatial distortions that shouldn't exist, and quantum effects that his species' most advanced scientists had never even theorized about. The human ship sat completely untouched at the center of this impossible display, surrounded by a sphere of twisted space-time that seemed to bend light itself. The horizon appeared to exist in its own pocket of altered reality, where the normal rules of cause and effect had been temporarily suspended by forces that the Vorthak couldn't begin to comprehend. "What sorcery is this?" Thaxmore whispered, his voice barely audible even to himself. In all his years of conquest across dozens of star systems, in all his battles against species that possessed technology he had thought advanced, he had never seen anything that even came close to what he was witnessing now. His science officers were frantically running diagnostics on their instruments, convinced that their sensors had to be malfunctioning. But every system confirmed the same impossible truth. The humans had somehow convinced the universe itself to break its own rules. The moment of frozen destruction stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though in reality only a few seconds passed. Throughout both fleets, crews stared in absolute amazement at the impossible sight before them. The Vorthak had fired enough concentrated firepower to level entire continents, and all of it now hung motionless in space like a deadly work of art that defied every law of physics. Captain Kim Day stood calmly on his bridge, surveying the scene with the satisfaction of someone whose 20-year gamble had just paid off in the most spectacular way possible. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had trained their entire careers for this exact moment. The impossible had become reality, and now it was time for the next phase of their plan. He turned toward his weapons officer with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout this entire encounter. Lieutenant Park Min sat at her console, her hands steady on controls that were about to make galactic history. She had spent years learning to operate systems that officially didn't exist, preparing for a moment that most people would have considered pure science fiction. "Officer Park," Captain Kim said in a voice that carried across the bridge with quiet authority, "please return their fire to sender." What happened next demonstrated the true genius of human engineering and the devastating potential of technology that could bend the fundamental forces of the universe. With movements as precise as a master pianist playing a complex symphony, Park Min began the process of reversing the quantum field polarity that held thousands of deadly weapons frozen in space. The effect was as elegant as it was terrifying. Every single energy blast that had been racing toward the horizon suddenly found itself moving in the exact opposite direction, accelerating back toward the ships that had fired them. But this wasn't simply a matter of reflecting the attack like some kind of cosmic mirror. The quantum field manipulation had done something far more devastating. It had amplified each energy beam, each plasma bolt, each quantum torpedo to carry 3 times its original destructive force. The Vorthak fleet suddenly found themselves facing their own weapons, but now each attack carried enough power to penetrate their strongest defenses. Shields that had been specifically designed to stop exactly these types of weapons proved completely useless against their own redirected fire. It was like trying to use an umbrella to protect yourself from a hurricane made of your own anger. Plasma. Beams that had been hot enough to melt asteroids now carried heat that could vaporize battleship hulls in milliseconds. Quantum torpedoes that could crack small moons now exploded with the force of dying stars. Energy weapons that had conquered star systems now turned their fury against their own creators with triple the devastating power. The destruction was swift, complete, and absolutely final. In the space of just a few heartbeats, 1,000 proud Vorthak warships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades simply ceased to exist. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They didn't even have time to send distress signals. They were transformed instantly into expanding clouds of superheated debris that glowed like tiny newborn stars against the darkness of space. The mighty Vorthak hegemony's grand invasion fleet, which had assembled with such confidence and arrogance, had been completely annihilated by their own weapons. Only Fleet Commander Thaxamor's flagship remained, and even it was badly damaged, its engines dead and hull breached in multiple places, drifting helplessly through the debris field that had once been his invincible armada. The silence that followed, the destruction was more profound than anything the galaxy had experienced in centuries. Where moments before there had been the confident chatter of 1,000 Vorthak warships preparing for easy victory, now there was only the soft hiss of cooling debris and the dying screams of metal twisted beyond recognition. The space around, the horizon looked like a graveyard of stars, filled with glowing fragments that had once been the most feared fleet in known space. From the wreckage of what had been Fleet Commander Thaxamor's flagship came a transmission so weak and broken that it was barely recognizable as speech. The proud, arrogant voice that had demanded humanity's surrender just minutes earlier was now reduced to a whisper filled with pain, shock, and something the Vorthak commander had never experienced before in his long career of conquest. Genuine. Fear. Please. The word came through the static like a prayer from a broken soul. We surrender. Don't destroy us. We yield to your power. The transmission was so different from the confident ultimatum Thaxamor had delivered earlier that it seemed to come from a completely different person. Gone was the savage anticipation of victory, the cruel satisfaction of a predator toying with its prey. In its place was the desperate plea of someone who had finally encountered a force beyond their understanding or ability to fight. Captain, Kim Day received this message with the same calm professionalism he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. There was no gloating in his voice, no satisfaction at having proven his enemy wrong, no desire to humiliate those who had threatened his species with extinction. Instead, his response carried the measured tone of someone who understood that true strength meant knowing when not to use it. Commander Thaxamor, Kim replied, his voice clear and steady across the communication channel. We offered you diplomatic solutions from the very beginning of this encounter. Humanity has always preferred peaceful resolution to our conflicts, believing that intelligent species can find common ground through honest negotiation and mutual respect. He paused for a moment, letting those words sink in before continuing. However, we also understand that not everyone shares our preference for diplomacy. That's why we prepare for every possible outcome, including those we hope will never come to pass. What happened next demonstrated something about human nature that would reshape how the galaxy viewed Earth's children forever. Instead of leaving, the survivors to die slowly in the wreckage of their fleet. Instead of finishing what they had started, the horizon began moving toward the crippled flagship with clear rescue intentions. This act of mercy was something completely foreign to Vorthak, culture and understanding. In their experience, victory meant total domination and the complete destruction of one's enemies. The idea that someone would show compassion to those who had just threatened them with genocide was so alien to their way of thinking that it was almost harder to comprehend than the impossible physics they had just witnessed. The Horizon's medical teams prepared to treat wounded aliens who had come to destroy them. Engineering crews readied equipment to help repair life support systems on a ship whose commander had promised to glass their worlds. It was a demonstration of the principles that humanity claimed to value, backed up by actions rather than just words. Fleet Commander Thaxamor, barely conscious in his damaged command center, would carry this lesson back to what remained of his people. The debris field floating around them spoke louder than any threat humanity could have made. The news of what had happened at the edge of human space traveled faster than any ship in the galaxy. Within hours, hyperspace communication networks were buzzing with reports that seemed too impossible to believe. A single human patrol vessel had faced down the entire Vorthak invasion fleet and emerged victorious. Not just victorious, it had completely annihilated 1,000 warships without sustaining so much as a scratch on its own hull, At first, most alien governments dismissed these reports as propaganda or misinformation. The Vorthak hegemony had been one of the galaxy's dominant military powers for centuries. Their fleet had conquered dozens of star systems and reduced entire civilizations to ash. The idea that humans, a species most powers considered barely advanced enough for interstellar travel, could destroy such a force was simply beyond belief. But as more details emerged, as survivors' testimonies were broadcast across diplomatic channels, as sensor recordings from distant monitoring stations confirmed the impossible, the galaxy was forced to confront a new reality. Humanity was not the primitive species they had all assumed. Behind their modest appearances and peaceful diplomatic overtures lay technology that could bend the fundamental laws of physics themselves. Emergency meetings were called in capital cities across dozens of worlds. Military advisors who had spent years planning potential invasions of human space suddenly found their strategies completely worthless. Intelligence agencies that had dismissed Earth as irrelevant scrambled to gather any information they could about human capabilities. Trade negotiations that had been conducted from positions of assumed superiority were quietly reconsidered. The Zeltron Empire, which had been preparing their own expedition to claim human mining colonies, abruptly cancelled their plans and instead sent diplomatic envoys offering favorable trade agreements. The Crystalline Confederacy, which had previously refused to even acknowledge human requests for embassy exchanges, suddenly found time in their schedule for formal diplomatic relations. Even the proud Stellar Republic, which had looked down on humanity as newcomers to galactic civilization, began treating human ambassadors with genuine respect. Meanwhile, the Horizon continued its patrol route as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Captain Kim Day and his crew went about their duties with the same quiet professionalism they had always shown. The ship looked exactly as unremarkable as it had before the battle, a standard patrol vessel with basic equipment and conventional appearance. But now every alien captain who encountered human ships in space remembered one crucial lesson that would be passed down through generations of spacefaring crews. Appearances meant absolutely nothing when dealing with human ingenuity and preparation. That modest-looking patrol craft might be exactly what it seemed, or it might be carrying technology that could rewrite the laws of physics on a whim. The galaxy had learned that humans possessed something more dangerous than superior firepower or advanced shields. They had superior preparation, the willingness to spend decades developing solutions to problems they hoped would never arise, and the wisdom to prepare for war while genuinely preferring peace. Captain Kim and his crew had accomplished something that would echo through galactic history. They had ensured humanity's survival not through conquest or intimidation, but by demonstrating that underestimating the quiet determination of Earth's children was a mistake no species would make twice. From that day forward, the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The age of human insignificance was over, and a new chapter in interstellar relations had begun.